Analyzing cost-time trade-offs, sometimes called activity crashing, project crashing, something to do with crashing. The nice academic way of talking about this is analyzing cost-time trade-offs, sort of the realistic slang, project crashing or activity crashing. As violent and as sometimes cool as that may sound. So this is kind of like, this is the accounting end of the project management game. Up to this point, we haven't really talked too much about costs. We've talked about organizing activities. We've talked about how long activities take. We've talked about critical paths. We talked about those important set of activities that drive the duration of the whole project. Now let's get into the dollars and cents of this all. Okay? So if you're into accounting, this is really easy peasy stuff. Pretty straightforward, basic approach to managerial accounting. Accounting's not your thing. Oof, keeping track of all these indirect and direct costs, and managing, changing and costing. It might be something you endure rather than love. But it is an important concept, because in order to achieve our objectives, and because it maybe make our customers happy, or increase our profits, it's a set of activities. This crash costing or this project crashing can be very, very important to us. Okay, we saw in our project so far is that in the normal course of events, our project will take 44 weeks. However, there is a bonus if we're able to achieve this project in 40 weeks. Well, now, hey, we can maybe get ourselves a nice juicy $150,000 bonus if we reduce the duration of this project by 4 weeks. Reducing the duration of the project to less than what it would typically take, that's project crashing. Right? And $150,000, I don't know about you, but to me that's real money. So we have some costs. So we have some definitions here. And total project cost just refers to basically everything that costs money in a given project. Direct cost, indirect costs, the all yucky penalty costs. And just like you would expect, direct costs, and we have direct costs and indirect costs, and they're very similar to variable costs and fixed costs, or variable costs and overhead costs. Direct costs are those costs, whether it's labor, whether it's materials, whether it's equipment, that are directly related to a project activity. Kind of like what you'd expect. Direct costs are those directly related to a specific product, for instance. Direct costs in this context, costs directly related to a particular activity. The activity being sort of like our product right now. Indirect costs are those costs related to the overall project, but not necessarily related to a particular activity. Very similar to how we would have looked at that in if we were to consider this like overhead. So it includes your admin, maybe your project manager, your project engineer, depreciation on equipment, right? That equipment could have been used across many different activities. It depreciates. That's a cost. Is it a cost attributable to a particular activity? Maybe not, but it is certainly a cost attributable to the entire project. And financing, all that cost of capital and good stuff that you'll learn in a corporate finance course. Those are costs associated to the entire project, not necessarily to a particular activity. Penalty costs are exactly what you would think of when you read the word, costs associated to not making some benchmark. So for instance, in the project we've worked through together so far, if it takes more than 47 weeks to finish this project, there's a big, nasty penalty cost attributable to that. Okay, a couple more definitions, and they're very intuitive. I think the definitions here are fairly intuitive. We haven't gotten anything that's really odd or terminology that doesn't make sense. We have, first of all, we have normal time and normal cost. And normal time is just how long does a particular activity typically take. And that's what we've worked with so far. Right? So far we have worked with, okay, typically how long does it take to complete activity A or excavation or something like that. We have avoided discussion of distributions and the beta distribution and so on, just because we just don't have time to get into that degree of sophistication. But normal time, even if we had a distribution, would be the median time it takes to complete an activity or the average time it takes to complete an activity. Normal cost is how much does it cost for us to complete that activity in the typical, normal, regular, median, average time frame. Okay, so it kind of makes sense, right? Normal, regular. Crash cost and crash time refer to, well, shortest time, right? So crash time is the shortest possible time to complete an activity. Doesn't mean that that's how long we want to take to complete an activity, but it's the shortest possible time it takes for us to complete an activity. If we're excavating, there comes a point where no matter how many backhoes and equipment you employ here, it just takes a certain amount of time to complete that activity. You're pouring concrete. I mean, you could pour concrete, you could have cement truck after cement truck over there. You can have a zillion workers, but at the end of the day, the concrete has to cure, and that just takes a certain amount of time. Crash costing, how much does it cost to achieve that shortest period of time? Now, a couple more terms, and we have two of them, and they're related to crashing. We can crash an activity, we can crash a project. And crashing activity is exactly that. We're employing more resources, whether those resources are labor or equipment, in order to reduce the time that a given activity takes. And that could entail adding equipment, that could be renting extra equipment, that could be hiring extra labor, that could be more overtime, that could be running the equipment maybe a little bit longer than we typically would. And that we do that with the idea of reducing the time that a given activity takes. Same kind of idea with the project, except we're now looking at a set of activities, a selection of activities that we're going to reduce the time that this set or this selection activities take, with the idea of reducing the time that the overall project takes. So same kind of goal, but crashing the project refers to a selection of activities, not necessarily just one activity. And we have a nice, cute little formula here that determines how much does it cost to crash per period. Now this is an additional cost over and above what we're normally paying. Okay, so this is what we call I would call, being an economist, a marginal cost, an extra cost, at the edge, a little bit of extra cost that we'd have to pay to achieve this crashing. Okay. And it's just the crash cost, CC, minus the normal cost. So the increase in costs from crashing divided by the time improvement that it takes. So normal time is longer than crash time. So we pay a certain amount to achieve a certain time objective. So we have a cost differential relative to a time differential. Change in cost divided by change in time. And that gets us the cost to crash per period. Sometimes this is provided to you and it's already worked out. Sometimes it's an extra little calculation. Just kind of keep your wits about you to realize which scenario you're facing at any one time. Okay? So sometimes you have to calculate this, sometimes you don't. It's already done for you. Yeah, just be aware. Look at what you have. Look at the data that's already been provided to you, and then make a judgment as to whether you need to do this calculation or not. Okay, you need the information regardless, but sometimes it's provided, sometimes it's an extra step to calculate. So we see the relationship, and we have cost on the y-axis and time along the x, and we see that our crash time is lower than our normal time, right? It's to the left on the x-axis to normal time. That makes sense, right? It takes less time, hence why we call it crashing. But that comes to cost, right? And we sort of see a little graph here about that time cost trade-off. Lower time comes with a higher cost. We've represented it as somewhat linear. Over the short term, that's not too bad a representation. One could make the argument that it's non-linear, but sometimes that introduces a whole host or a whole bunch of really complicating calculations because of nonlinearity that aren't worth it. So you can kind of see it's represented as linear. Theoretically, you could make the argument that it's not. Like equipment depreciation, it's probably non-linear, but given the time frames we're talking about, given the ease of calculation, it's probably not worth it to introduce a non-linearity complication to the problem. So what's our objective? Hey, business, our objectives are usually pretty straightforward. We're either at least at the very high level, we're maximizing profit or minimizing cost, and they're typically associated with the same thing. Okay? By minimizing costs, we typically are maximizing profit. Now we do have constraints, right? And just like we had when we talked, if you took Finance 113, which we will soon call Management Science 113, our Introduction to Quantitative Decision Making course, you would have seen in the linear programming section that, hey, yes, you minimize costs, but there are certain requirements, there's certain fulfillments, there's certain contractual things that we have to adhere to. So it's a constrained minimum, and same thing here is a constrained minimum. Okay? And now, just because we can crash an activity, we can keep in mind, it doesn't mean that it's optimal for us to do so, right? Just because we can do something doesn't mean we ought to be doing it. Kind of like life that way. Because you can do something doesn't mean you should do something. And so we can now just use these simple concepts, bring it together in a little 4-step procedure, and to determine what we call the minimum cost schedule. That is the minimum amount of, we're trying to minimize our costs subject to certain requirements. Okay, so 4 steps here. First of all, the key thing is we have to determine the project's critical path, which we've already talked about. It's those are the activities that are driving how long the project will take. And so by reducing the time or reducing the duration of that critical path, we reduce the time that the project takes. Spending a whole pile load of money to reduce the time that an activity that's not on a critical path takes, it just doesn't do us it's no good. It's dumb. It makes no sense. Right? We'll spend a whole bunch of time to reduce the time that a given activity takes, and it doesn't reduce the time the project takes, because how long the project takes is determined by the critical path. So we focus in and we zero in on those activities on the critical path. So zeroing in on those activities on the critical path, we then find the activity or activities on that critical path with the lowest per period crash cost, right? We want to reduce the duration of the project, but we want to needlessly spend a whole bunch of money. And we certainly don't want to, like I said, from step 1, we don't want to crash an activity not on the critical path because that doesn't help us anything. Right? So we want to, first of all, focus on the critical path. Second of all, focus on those activities on the critical path where if we were to crash them by a period, let's say, it costs us the least amount of money. Typically, bonuses are set to time. It's a fixed amount, fixed amount of bonus per some period of time, whether it's per week, per day, or per selection of weeks, or per project. So we get a fixed amount, coming into us as the bonus. And now on the other end, our idea is to meet that requirement by spending the least amount of money possible. Makes sense, right? Now we go on to step 3. We're going to reduce the time for this activity until a couple of things happen. First of all, until it can't be reduced anymore, which is fair, right? I mean, sometimes some activities do take, or all activities take, a minimum amount of time, right? We can only reduce it to a certain level, which is how long a given activity takes to a certain minimum level. If we reach that certain minimum level, okay, we can't reduce the time that activity takes any longer. Second thing, another path becomes critical. Right? Because one pathway was the critical path when we started at the very beginning of our project crashing experience, doesn't mean it stays the only critical path. We may reduce the duration of that critical path such that there is another path that is now also the critical path. And there is nothing that doesn't say that we may have a result where we have 1, 2, 3, many critical paths. That's where the fun begins, because then we got to crash all these critical paths at once. That's where project crashing really kicks it up into the fun stuff. Right? So things get a little hairy at that point. Or we reach the point where it's just not worth our while. The costs of crashing is higher than our benefits. At that point, we go, no, thanks, but no thanks. No point in us crash costing any further because it's not in our interests. Our costs of crashing, outweigh the benefits of that crashing. At that point, we say stop. And again, just to emphasize, we can have more than one critical path, and when that occurs, we have to be thinking about how to crash all the critical paths. So sometimes we may have to, in order to reduce the duration of a project by one period, we may have to crash 2 or 3 projects at once. Very wild stuff. Very cool. And then step 4, we keep this process going until the costs of crashing are higher than the benefits that we receive from crashing. When we reach that point, we stop. Makes sense, right? So from our project that we had before, we see some cost trade-offs. So normal time is what we were working with originally, and now we have some crash time. So third column in is crash time, and that is the lowest amount of time it takes to complete a given activity. We also have a normal cost, and we have crash costs. We have how much we can possibly reduce this activity. So for instance, for activity A, we can go from a normal time of 2 weeks to a crash time of 1 week. That difference is 1 week, i.e. we could reduce it by 1 week. For B, we can, it normally takes 4 weeks. We can take as little as 2 weeks, and so 4 minus 2 gives us the reduction of 2 weeks. C can take a normal time is 10 weeks. The shortest amount of time it could possibly take is 7 weeks. 10 minus 7 means that we can reduce how long C takes by a maximum of 3 weeks. Okay. Now, it's already worked out for us here, crash cost per week saved. I mean, I encourage you to go 200,000 minus 180,000 divided by 1. Hey, it becomes 100,000. 420,000 minus 320,000, which is 100,000, divided by 4 minus 2, which is 2. Hey, guess what? 50,000. Not very hard calculations. So we will be working with these crash costs per week saved. Right? This shows us how much money we save by crashing this particular activity, or how much money it costs us to crash this particular activity by 1 week. Okay, so that becomes an important piece of information for us. The second thing that we now need to keep track of, and this is crucially important, is we need to know all the pathways. So we calculated this earlier, right? And we found this earlier, and we drew out all the different pathways from beginning to end, from start to finish, and how long each one of those paths took. And we see in red here, right, there's our critical path. It is the pathway that took the longest amount of time, and therefore it dictates how long the entire project takes. And in this case, the entire project takes 44 weeks. Now, we look along this critical path, and we see those activities of A and B and C and E and F and J and L and N. And we now look and say, okay, which one of those activities can we crash? Right? Which one's the cheapest? Okay, so let's go look. And we go back to our original slide. We go, now our goal is we want a $150,000 bonus. So that's our ultimate goal. If we can crash this by 4 weeks, we get 150 grand. But we have to crash it by the 4 weeks. Well, we look at A, $100,000, that's a lot of money. B, 50,000. A lot of money, but better than A, so B is winning right now. C is 80,000, too much. What do we else we have? We have E. E, 160,000 for E. Well, E is out. Okay, E is out. There's just no math where E works, right? Because 160,000 is more than the 150,000 bonus we could possibly get. So E is done. I mean, we don't care about E. E is dead to us. F is 40,000. Okay, that's looking the best so far, right? J, 30,000. Ooh, even better than F. I'm liking J here. So J's at 30,000. Let's look at L, 50. Okay, not bad, but still J's better. And N, 60,000. Okay, again, it's okay. But J is definitely our winner. Okay, so now we kind of go over back to our table. And we want to crash. Okay, we want to crash J. Yeah, I know. I clicked on there. I thought I was going to edit it. And it kind of bounced around, you know. So let's go with J. And we have a cost of $30,000. And now we just kind of go through the pathways. Now, J is not on the first pathway, so we didn't change anything there. Not on the second pathway, so we didn't change much there. It is on the third one, so we take that down to 42 weeks. Of course, it is on the critical path. Take that down to 43 weeks. And there we see it. So that path goes down to 40 weeks. And this one goes down to 41. So J is on a few different pathways. Now let's just look at our cost structure here for a sec. How many times could we crash J? Ooh, could crash J up to 2 times. That's cool. That's good. So we can do it again. Okay. Right. We already determined it's the lowest one. Right now we still have only one critical path, so that part of it still remains straightforward. So we crash J again. It's going to cost us another $30,000. And again, these first 2 do not have J on them, so they don't change. The third one goes down another week. Critical path goes down another week. Getting so close, 42 weeks. Very exciting. This one goes down to 39, and the last one goes down to 40. So still, critical path remained the same, and it is still set to be 42 weeks. Okay, so awesome. Now, we're remembering there was an activity, one of those activities wasn't too bad, so we're done with J. J is set. We can't crash J any further. We've crashed it 2 weeks. That was the maximum amount we could crash it, so we're done with J. So now we look at the next activity. And when we were going through here, we noted that F was 40,000. So F was the lowest that we had from before. So now let's crash F. We crash F. That does cost us a little bit more, 40,000. F is not in the first one, so that doesn't change. It's not in the second one, so that doesn't change. It is in the third one, so that goes down to 40. Of course, it's on a critical path, going down to 41. It's not in that path, no F there, and no F on the last one. Okay. So close. Ooh, can't remember. How many times can we crash F? F can be crashed again. Ooh, awesome. Let's do it. So we'll crash F again. And that costs $40,000. 1, 2, 3. And again, looking for the pathways that actually contain F. And our critical path knocks down to 40,000. Bonus time. Woohoo! That one doesn't change. And the last one doesn't contain F, so it doesn't change. Okay. So at this point, we have achieved our goal of reducing the time that this project takes from 44 weeks to 40 weeks. $150,000 bonus is now in play. Our next step is to calculate how much money can we possibly make. So we get to 150, but how much did this cost us? Well, it cost us all that crash costing time. 30,000 plus 30,000 plus 40,000 plus 40,000. And we run there, that's 80 and plus 60, it's $140,000 it cost us to crash it. We get a bonus of $150,000, which means by crashing, we earn ourselves an extra $10,000. Go for it, right? We're very happy with that. We'll take that $10,000. Thank you very much. And we are all set there. And here's the completed version. It's on your set of slides. There's our whole project, and we're going to crash it. Right? There's the 40 weeks that it takes. We've reduced the relevant time periods. And this is sort of the completed. So if you like, you can go through and work through the fact that F takes 2 weeks instead of F taking 5 weeks like it normally scheduled. You can use it as a what happens if F takes 3 weeks. J, which normally took 8 weeks when we first drew out the graph and the diagram, now takes 6 weeks. I encourage you to go through there and just adjust those two activities to be 3 and 6, and you'll end up with this particular graph. Many of the items stay the same because we didn't crash them, right? We only really focused in on 2 activities, F and J. Next thing we look at, we see now if we were to crash this further, things get a little interesting because we actually have 3 critical paths here. So the next time, if we wanted to hit this down to 39 weeks, we would have to think of an activity that we could crash that would reduce the first pathway, the 4th pathway, and the 6th pathway all at once. And perfectly, we would try to see if we can get an activity that's common to all 3. But if that's not open to us or that's too expensive, we may have to consider a combination of activities. And you'll see that in the practiced exercises. Fun stuff. Stay tuned.